Alright, so we left off at the end of chapter 42. Mars Bar is going his own way, but Jeffrey has some kind of respect for him for the way he handled himself with the McNabs. And Jeffrey is walking around and he's tired and he decides it's time to go home. And then he realizes he has no home to go to. So we start in chapter 43. He slept in the park that night and for the next dozen or so. Sometimes in the buffalo shed, other times the bandshell benches or the pavilion. The nights were warm now. June was on the way. He ate when and where he could. For apples and carrots and day-old hamburger buns, you couldn't beat the deer and buffalo pens. A new Acme had opened, and the bakery section always had a tray of free samples sitting on the counter. And then there were always the Pickwells. It may have been an illusion, but it seemed that the hungrier he got, the farther Mrs. Pickwell's whistle traveled. Some dinner times, there was hardly a spot in town from which he could not hear it. He read in the library. He joined pickup games in the park. Baseball, basketball. School was letting out. There were more kids. Mornings were the best. He would rise with the sun's color, before the sun itself, before the bison, and set out. He came to think of these apple skin hours as his special time with the town. There was not a street or alleyway, or house or store, not even a garage that he did not recognize. His footsteps fell everywhere but on the bridge over the Scullykill, his eyes everywhere but on the P&W trolley trestle. Remember, that's the train that went over the off the tracks and killed his parents. And the people, most of them, he did not know by name or face, yet they revealed themselves to him even as they slept. He knew them by their windows and cars and porches and toys they left outside. But most of all, he knew them by their backyards. Flowers, weeds, junk, pet houses, tree houses, vegetable gardens, rubber tires, grass ranging from desert sparse to shaggy to trim as a Marine's haircut. The backyards were as different, as individual as faces. East End and West End, black and white, would begin only when the alarm clocks rang. For now, before sunrise, there were no divisions, no barriers. There were only the people, the families, the town. His town. As much his town as anyone's. He knew he could be sleeping right then in the Bills' house or the Pickwells or even the McNabs. But beyond that, for a few enchanted moments each newborn morning, he believed there was not a single home in Two Mills, not a single one, that would not happily welcome him to enter and to go upstairs and curl up between its sleepers. Maybe that's why he left his bandshell bench late one night in mid-June and went to someone's backyard on Hamilton Street, someone whose leaf lettuce he had watched growing, and quietly opened the gate and closed it behind him and laid himself down on a white wicker love seat on the back porch. From then on, he slept in a different backyard or back porch every night. Once, finding the back door unlocked, he slept in a kitchen. So, Jeffrey feels like he knows this town. This town is his town. And he feels like he knows the people who live in these houses because he knows what toys they have, if they leave toys out, if they have a yard that they mow and keep up, or if they let the grass grow and they have junk in the backyard, or if they have a vegetable garden, if they have flowers. He feels like he knows these people. And there's a small moment where he feels like he belongs or could belong to any of those houses. And of course that's not true. And so even though he feels this, he decides to start sleeping at these houses. Now of course he's not sleeping in the houses, he's sleeping on the back porch. But he feels somehow connected to this area. Alright, chapter 44. One morning in early July, cruising down the Appleskin Hour, Maniac thought he heard footsteps other than his own. He stopped. Only the vast quietness responded. It happened a few more times. Must be his own footfalls echoing down the row house canyons. 2 days later, passing an alley, he thought something moved at the other end. And once, turning onto a broad street, he had the feeling, more sense than sight, that something had just flashed around a corner 2 blocks away. When these odd sensations continued for another morning or two, Maniac knew he was not alone. So he was not totally surprised when, a few mornings later, he turned a corner and ran smack into another early-hour cruiser. No, it wasn't the what that surprised him, it was the who. Mars Bar Thompson. They quickly bounced off each other and went their separate ways. Neither paused, neither said a word. This was the first in a series of apparently random mergings. intersections, alleyways. One never knew when he would come upon the other. Sometimes they found themselves running the same route, only a block apart. On one occasion, they trotted down the same street at the same time in the same direction, but on opposite sides of the street. And then one day, as it happened, they each turned a particular corner at the same moment and headed off in the same direction, side by side. Still neither spoke. Not even their eyes met. They jogged silently for a block, then veered apart. The next time they dovetailed. They stayed that way for 2 blocks, then 3 blocks, and so on. No words, no looks, just the rhythmic slapping of their sneaker soles upon the sidewalk and the pulsing duet of their breathings, stride for stride, shoulder to shoulder, breath for breath, till they were matching on all points, a harnessed pair, 2 runners become one. Morning after morning it happened this way, the 2 of them dovetailing at an intersection, and without the slightest hitch in stride, cruising off together. Though each face showed no awareness of the other, they were in fact minutely sensitive to each other. If Mars Bar cranked up the pace just a notch, Maniac would pick it up within a stride. If Maniac inched ahead, Mars Bar was there. If one veered to the left or right, the other followed like a shadow. One day one was the leader, the next day the other. One day Mars Bar would lead Maniac down the river, down the tracks, past the railroad gondolas, each with its mountain of coal, to the rolling mill at the steel plant where his father worked. Another day Maniac would head for the townships to the north and west, the farmlands of the county, where dew sparkled on spider webs, and nature was doing such fresh and wonderful things that you could almost hear the long, neat congregations of corn clapping Amen and Amen. When the working people began leaving their houses, the Daybreak Boys diverged. Mars Bar to the east end, Maniac to wherever. A week passed, a second week. Morning after morning, stride for stride, breath by breath, never a word, never a glance, each believing the other simply happened to be going where he was going. They were cruising Main Street one morning, passing the Grand Movie Theater, when Piper McNabb came screaming down the middle of the empty street. He was wild-eyed and crying and soaking wet. His feet were slathered in coal-black mud. He shrieked and babbled at them, but he made no sense, so they just followed as he raced frantically back up the street. As they ran, the belch-like toot of a whistle grew louder and louder. He led them to the corner of Main and Swede, to where the platform of the P&W trolley terminal hung high above the sidewalk. He burst into the terminal building and up the steps. In a moment, Maniac and Mars Bar were on the platform, gasping and following Piper's pointing finger down the tracks. What they saw pulled the fragments of Piper's babble together. The boys had been playing bombs away. Piper's part was to sail the raft down the river. Russell's part was to wait on the trolley trestle that spanned the river, and when Piper passed underneath, bomb away from a bucketful of rocks. So a trestle is like, if you've ever seen in those cartoons where there's like a train going over a river and it just has the tracks. There's no rail where like anyone could walk across. It's just the tracks meant for the train, and it's high above the river. So the trestle, the trolley is kind of like that. If you've seen a trolley car, it's kind of like a little cart that's attached to a rail that goes through a town. Well, this goes across the river. And they were playing a game where Russell was on the tracks, and his job was to throw rocks down at Piper, who was on his little raft, pretending that he was bombing the raft. So they're playing a game, and it says, everything went as planned, unless you count Russell's failing to sink the raft and Piper's practically drowning trying to beach it, until Piper returned to the terminal to find Russell still out on the trestle. Apparently without the target below to focus on, Russell had suddenly discovered how high he was. One false step and he could slip right between the ties to the river. So now he's looking down. He realizes how high he is and he can't move. And that's where Russell was now, out on the middle of the trestle, high over the water, frozen in terror, not even a railing to cling to, responding neither to Piper's cries nor to the red and yellow P&W trolley, which also occupied the trestle, idling and tooting about 20 feet away. So Piper was trying to yell at him, you've got to come on, and there's a trolley coming. There's a little train coming. Piper pulled at Maniac. "Save him! Save him!" Mars Bar stared with growing astonishment at Maniac, whose wide, unblinking eyes were fixed on the trestle, yet somehow did not seem to register what was there. Nor did he seem to hear Piper pleading. With the drenched, mud-footed kid clawing at him, he turned without a word, without a gesture, and left the platform and went downstairs. Shortly he appeared on the sidewalk below. He crossed Main and continued walking slowly up Swede, Piper screaming after him from the end of the platform. So he looks out, he sees that trolley trestle, and he turns around and leaves.